So it did sound like Faisal was going to join us today. But I don't see him on yet. So what's if you want to do a kind of a quick check-in, we can get started on that and just kind of what are you up to?
Busy as always, right? Just doing different stuff. Right now we've got our managed side clicking pretty well, and so now I'm going back. It's one of those things where you get things going on one side, then you do this, do that, do this, do that. So now I'm going back and doing some more stuff on our quick track side of stuff to get some items cleaned up over there that I hadn't been doing. So
Yeah.
It's kind of in a weird place right now of trying to get that stuff going, but good. Our new employees that we've got are working out pretty well. They're doing what I want them to. There's still some training elements that need to go on, or fixing up some of our KPIs to better reflect and helping them get on board in the right way. But overall, it's looking like we're in the right direction anyway.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been good. Been busy, but been good.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the kind of when you put your focus on one thing and take it off another, and then that stuff fades. That's really a big part of this entrepreneur startup that you see a lot, where that struggle between balancing all those different aspects of the business when you have the limited resources for that.
Yeah, and it's always kind of it's always been kind of a step ladder thing too, right? It's like, okay, we'll clean this up, fix this up, now we can move to this thing, now we can move to this thing, and then back over here again, and you step everything forward a little bit more each time. But
right,
especially in a small business, everything's so interconnected that you gotta bring up the levels of everything over time, like, I don't know, balance them out so that the levels come up together. Otherwise you get too far on one way or the other. So
yeah, I think Faisal would call that critical path. Are you there, Faisal? I thought I saw him coming in.
Hey guys, I'm just connecting to I'm just getting to the office, so I'm
Awesome.
Listening intensely. So sorry about that.
That's okay. This wonderful technology allowing I've had a few of my training sessions with people that are being done on the road. I struggle with that in some ways with something that's that type of content that we're going through. Is it really the best to get that information while you're driving? But anyway, so we're just right now, Faisal, just kind of checking in. I normally, most of these sort of groups do, with just what are you focused on? What are you working on? Maybe some successes that are coming along the way, and then maybe a brief little bit about what's happening in your perspective of our topic, whatever that is for the month. And so Dana's gone through a few different things. They just hired a couple of new techs that they're onboarding. That seems to be going pretty well for them. Anything else, Dana, that you want to add to that?
No, I mean, not that I don't think I've already said. Like I said, it's been going good. It's nice getting those positions. Of course, my dog starts barking here.
Mine might soon here too. Then anyway.
Yeah, no, it's our new senior tech is working out pretty well, which really for us, we cleared up some space for our guy to be fully a project guy. So that's making my life way better. And it's making project planning actually far more efficient, because that's always been a problem in our stuff, is that my people are service oriented for the most part, and that's our primary thing. So then doing projects is always like, it's always that balance of, we need this project done, we need to support the clients, and it's a lot harder to plan a long-term project around that stuff. You do your best you can, and you try to factor in extra time and this, that, and the other, but man, Now having somebody that can actually sit and focus on things makes it way easier to plan.
So is that their dedicated single role is as a project planner, or do they have other responsibilities and project planning is one of them?
No, he's not project planning. He's my project implementer. right?
Executor.
So we took, Matthew was our senior tech and I hired a new senior tech and I bumped him into just he's a project's role, right? So he can be escalated to if need be, but I pulled him mostly out of the support cycle so that I can give him jobs to do, and that makes it way easier to say, here, you're the primary on this. And now I supplement what he needs or whatever. I supplement his time with other techs. But I can float them in on things that it's not as critical if they bounce and do other support and stuff, but he can actually be taking care of the heavy lifting projects. Cause there's a lot of like stuff that has to happen before the critical path stuff that has to happen before you can move on in a project.
Right.
And when you have your senior tech that's getting escalated large issues, also doing your projects, it gets problematic. So
Yeah.
it's way easier this way to have him doing that. It's been working really nice, and it keeps him focused so that the projects stay in a better order.
Yeah, it feels like and sounds like that would be a pretty typical progression for an IT company. It's something I know that they did in Mankato, and Basil, I'm just letting him in.
Yeah.
Hold
Yeah,
on.
and it's a nice progression. One of the reasons I have the role too is that it's a good progression. Not everybody wants to promote into a management track. And so this is a place where you can promote into that fits people's desires more. And that was a discussion I had with the tech. I'm like, we can go this way or that way. And he's like, I want to do projects and stuff. That's what he wants to be hands-on. That's what he wants. He doesn't want anything to do with management track. So
Yeah.
here you go. I can escalate you in technical capability. I can escalate our company's ability and give, progression so that he doesn't get stale. So
Are you doing the project management part of it though?
yeah, for now, and that's one of those things, right? If there needs to be more progression over there, then we can look at doing more of that. Like that's not the same as full management track. Project management is a little bit different, or a lot of it different.
More like a lead supervisor feel.
Yeah, so there's room to grow in that area too. So, but yeah, I tend to do most of the project management just because I'm helping, coordinate. Well, I set up the whole project and then I got to coordinate what my other techs are doing, and I don't want him doing that. I just want him doing the job right now.
Right. So I do want to get your feedback and insights on our topic. And I will say I brought this topic to this month basically out of my own selfish desires and needs. It's interesting. For a long time since I started Aligned Operations, I've struggled with the kind of the ideas of leadership and what we do with Aligned Operations and operations. Is it two separate things? Is leadership, because you have leadership coaches, and I just felt like that world is something I never wanted to be part of. But I end up talking to a lot of people. I thought I could engage leaders as far as referral opportunities, but they don't understand when I start talking to them often about operations. And I'm like, do they not understand operations? People who are leadership experts. So I'm trying to get some clarity around leadership as it relates to operations. Is it leadership in operations, or is it something separate? Is it leadership and, so I would be really interested from two very operationally minded people, what your thoughts are about operations as you function day to day. And go.
I can pipe in if you don't want to. I talk all the time. Do you want to say anything, Faisal? Otherwise, I can always jump in. But
Oh, Kelly's listened to me talk for a long time. Dana, nice to talk to you again.
Yeah.
I don't know where to start. I'll just give it kind of a quick framework, and Dana, you can weigh in. For me, leadership is there's different degrees, and um, I go back to the layered of leadership and its autonomy, methods of control, or command and control structure. And Dana, in your previous conversation, kind of the path to leadership, there has to be two parallel paths, because I think errors of systems is that once you've mastered certain duties within an organization, most organizations will default that you have leadership qualities when that is truly not true.
Right.
So you have to have, like Dana mentioned, two paths. And the paths, to me, there's a complete correlation between compensation and kind of like responsibility within an organization. So for me, leadership comes into the command and control element that comes to productivity, and it's about amplifying a team's ability to generate work breakdown or some work product. And leaders are really this amplifier and grease. They smooth through all these different interdependent operations to make sure that the end goal is met. So I'll just leave it at that. So that to me, leadership is all about degrees of responsibilities, the organizational command and control structure, and then these parallel paths that other individuals have that are SMEs, subject matter experts, that can get compensated and retained.
Thoughts, Dana?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that, and like we're saying, that they're definitely separate. I think of them, I always go back to the military side of things, I guess, but I think of leadership as more people oriented, and I think of operations as more task oriented. They should be combined, right? Well, actually, I should say, yeah, operations / management. I kind of put those in a similar concept of if you're managing work or whatever, but that's more of a task oriented thing. But good leadership is about people and helping them progress and grow and do what they need to do, and helping them perform best at the job. Good operations people are good leaders, and they're good at managing, right? Like, they're good at both pieces of that. But I definitely see, like you're saying, that leadership is often taught in one way. And if you're talking to a person that's entirely lived their life talking about leadership, they're not going to be talking as much about operations type stuff, because you're talking business strategy in there. You're talking like how to get this thing to get here, whereas leadership is talking about how to motivate people and similar items to that. So it's kind of I'm getting kind of ambiguous on this.
Yeah, I'm trying to make a connection. If I'm a small business growing and I want to be successful, it's easy, I think, to understand, well, for me and you guys, I think, understand the operational components. I need to have a structure. I need to have a hierarchy of authority. I need to have functions broken out. I need documentation. Those things are very tangible for me to implement into an organization. Leadership to me is not. And so as I have discussions about the components of successful organizations, I struggle with, I can speak to role descriptions, and I can speak to constraint analysis and KPIs. What I struggle then is this additional thing of leadership and what that means in getting that into the organization. Is leadership necessary even, I guess?
For high levels of success, yes. You'll notice that the more successful people, they may not have trained fully in leadership, but they have it inherently. You'll see it. A very easy place to see it is when you first promote somebody into a manager position. If they don't have good leadership qualities, they will struggle and fail and usually quit or go somewhere else, or there's major problems. I've seen it so many times. Whereas if you promote a manager from you looking at leadership qualities, and they're doing decent at the work, then they will generally do better in that space, if that makes sense. I actually think that we have the Navy, here, I'll go back to this. Like, the Navy is actually doing a lot to address this the last several years. They've been increasing their leadership training at different levels to try to help, because we used to have kind of a lack of good leadership training. Like, they did some, but right as time went on, people were more focused on getting their jobs done, and we noticed that there was a problem there. So they've been addressing that, and it's useful and helpful. If you don't, and that's where we get into, like, where Faisal was calling out what I was saying earlier. And what I was doing with Matthew, for instance, is, you know, he does have some leadership qualities, but he's not interested in leadership things, and therefore he's going to be discontent in that area.
What are those qualities or traits or things? What can you, let's maybe break that down a little bit.
There's some pieces that go into, like, emotional intelligence, understanding, you know, how your people fit into their roles, helping people. It's basically around mentorship type of concepts. And man, I'm not, I have things to say about this.
Faisal?
Yeah, you go ahead while I try to.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I have to kind of take a step back here and just kind of look at it. I think of it as, if you lay it down on a kind of a org chart or a platform, I see people that have mastered duties and responsibilities within their areas of responsibility. They've mastered what they want, and out of that, what you see is you see two groups emerge. You see people that have and Dana, this is where you and I will probably discuss a little bit further. You have people that have tendencies or personalities that lead to mentoring and kind of shepherding other newer people, and those are your emerging what I consider supervisors, leads. Those people come there. So it kind of percolates where someone is really gifted in an area, they want to train, they want to mentor, they do it. And you have others who are just individual contributors, and they want to stay that path throughout their lives. They don't like the dynamics or anything with the additional responsibilities in an org. So you kind of get that. And then from the group that has percolated into the lead supervisors, then what you do is you see people kind of develop, and you should have external support to do this, into people that can start anticipating changes in their environment. And to me, those are the people you want to gather, invest in, and really make into your next round of leadership. And then out of those two groups, you have three people. You have the toxic people that at some point ambition outstrips ability to contribute to the organization, and you have to be aware of those, because usually they're very dynamic, and a lot of people will respect that. And you see it in dynamics of democracies and political science. The second group is the group that really wants to develop into taking on more responsibilities and having that protection of their team. So they have this combination of skills, this combination of ambition, and this personality trait of protecting the team and the organization, and those are the ideal people. Then you have the people that are visionaries, that like to break down structures to make it into a better scenario, and those people end up needing the people that in the second group I mentioned, because together it comes back to that visionary implementation person. That right combination of those two groups actually excel an organization beyond what you can get with just incremental growth or organic growth.
So I started looking at an approach of what it's not. What is not leadership is, as Faisal, the two tracks of somebody who probably is going to be in leadership. And I guess in looking at an org chart, would it be accurate to say there's a spectrum of leadership capability? At the very top, there should be very, very high levels of that. and at the front line, there's probably very, very low. And then is there some of that in the middle through the management team and director levels? Is that a possible way to look at it, you think?
I want to throw this question out to Dana to get your thoughts, Dana. But Kelly, I think of it as a spectrum, but I think of it as a scatter diagram, where you have this swath of individuals that have different skill sets. And over time, they evolve and they change, because me at 20 is completely different than me at 53. It's a different person. And you can see them in the scatter diagram emerge. And one side is individual development or individual contributor, and the other is leadership. And then as they go into the leadership spectrum, that's where you have the visionary, where the people are amazing thinkers beyond the current constraints of an organization. Then you have the people that want to optimize current constraints and remove them and evolve the organization within a more structural approach. So you have one that's more dynamic in consideration. You have one that's more step-like, Kaizen approach to improvement. And that's the group that over time, kind of all mingles together and they evolve, and then you get them, you get the A players in the A positions on the bus and you're set. And that's what you look for. And even A players over time also evolve. So you just have to look for it. I think the biggest detriment to organizations is to not recognize the third group of leadership, which is the leadership, or not even leadership, is the traits of individuals that are perceived as leaders that are more individualistic in thinking. And that, I think, hurts an organization much more in leadership than anything else. So Dana, I think in your discussion with, I think it's Matthew you mentioned, that's great. I think Matthew could emerge later on in life, depending on his personal journey on being a leader. But having a SME is great, but then you have to look at people that might not even be best at their industry, but are very good at kind of championing teams to get things done.
Yeah.
So,
sorry if I jumped in a little early. You're right on that. I'll kind of hit both of those things a little bit. I think, Kelly, to your point, the at different levels, you'll see it more. So leadership can exist. People with good leadership qualities and leadership skills can exist throughout all the levels, right? But you're going to see it more as you move up because it's required more for those positions, and those positions then give more opportunity to hone your leadership skills. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who are really good leaders at other levels in the organization, and that may still want to stay in those other levels, right, and still be good leaders. Like Matthew actually is a pretty good leader in a certain way, like we're talking about, but he doesn't want to have that overall responsibility and that kind of leadership. He's good as a SME, like you're saying, and he's good at more mentor side of things. He's much better on that side and he doesn't want the management type skills. So I think, yeah, you're going to see at lower levels, you're going to get more of the leadership versus just the doers. So you're going to have a mix. And then as you go up, you're going to hone people in different directions, and recognizing that is really important. And in growth of an organization. And then I would say, yeah, I agree that there's a problem in some industries of very strong A-type charismatic personalities, like you said, that are more aggressive and domineering, and they'll overtake and be seen as leaders, and they do a very good job in certain areas, but you'll notice you're having that problem as the morale in your teams drop, and despite having what seems like high levels of productivity to begin with, you'll start to see a drop off, and you'll start to see other problems going on. And the problem in an organization is that can actually go on for a long time and be very damaging to your overall culture. And if you're watching numbers and not people, then it's very easy to miss. And I think if we're talking traits, like really the most differentiating thing when you're looking for it is that whole does this person seem like they're people oriented or task oriented? That always comes down to me. And I a large quality of the good leaders in my mind is they're naturally going to be somewhat self-sacrificing. They're giving a little bit extra time and energy or something in a way that frequently the workers don't, like everybody else doesn't necessarily notice. And the good leaders aren't necessarily going to tell everybody that that's what's happening either. So as you're up higher, you need to be watching for those qualities. Cause if they're not usually going to celebrate their success or be like, hey, I did this for you, so to save you, that's not what they're doing. Whereas the negative quality leaders are very likely to be highlighting themselves to show like, hey, look what I did, and promoting off of that, which it tends to be a problem in our culture. And if we're not paying the right attention to our people, if we're not being good leaders, then it's very easy to promote the wrong people.
Can I weigh in, Dana? I think you're 100% on. Nothing more for me to add. I think there's a further framework, Kelly, that you bring up. In everything Dana explained, which I'm in full agreement, there's two elements that I think there's a big difference between Dana, like an organization you're in with, and organizations I have been in, and that is the scale. And in a smaller organization, what you see, and Dana, this speaks to kind of an organization looking for traits, is that, and forgive me, Dana, I speak pretty honestly, like in your organization, Brian's personality dictates the culture of the organization and will be until you get to a bigger scale. Yep. So between you and Brian, you two kind of are two poles of personality traits that bring in, and there will always be a push-pull relationship. And as long as it's in a positive manner, it's great and it's dynamic. But your organization is going to be known as YouTube, period.
Right.
In a larger organization, there's these layers of autonomy and accountability, and that helps shape, shapes the cultural elements of it that other people will champion over time. And it goes back to the founders.
Can I get you to elaborate a little bit more on the phrase layers of autonomy?
Yeah, so HR doesn't report up to the scale of, the org. You have the talent, so you have these powerhouses within a large organization that have autonomy that either report directly up to the chair or report up to the board. And in their autonomy, they can hold each other more accountable in the right manner. And in bigger orgs, you get that conflict and you get all the pros and cons of working in a big org, but it's those personality traits that run these semi-autonomous groups that cause both good and bad friction in the org. But
autonomy is just meaning you can function on your own, right? Is that correct?
And you have areas of responsibility that can't be curtailed by the group you're watching. Like it's internal audit. Think of it as an internal audit group. Like, when we audit it, there's nothing another organization can do to curtail our audit. And we report directly up to the board or, the finance group. So, any group can come in and bitch about us, but until there is some kind of breakdown in our approach, we can do whatever we want. So that autonomy allows us to hold other organizations within, other members within an organization responsible. In the same way for leaders in a larger organization, there's this dynamic within their structure, and there's a dynamic with other groups within their organization that there's this push-pull that go through it. That personality trait of the organization is better managed because it can evolve by the leaders.
Again, I'm focusing on my world because that's what's most important. Is there a thought? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, focusing on your world, it is the founder and the individual owner that is it. So if it's human nature to attract people of similar mindsets together.
So you're saying in smaller organizations that autonomy does not exist beyond the founder / owner.
Mm-hmm. And Dana, not to put you on the spot, do you feel that's a true statement?
Yeah, and I've got experience with the difference, right? Because if nobody's going to argue that the Navy isn't a large organization, so I 100% I do agree. And
Oh,
I
right.
think what's important is like the difference being with this level of when you're talking autonomy, it's as you get bigger, right? Right now we're small enough. Brian knows everybody, but as you grow higher, that level of autonomy changes too. As you don't, as a certain level of leader cannot see down to the bottom level. They require somebody else to be telling them what's going on there. As that happens, that's when you get more of that level of different variations of autonomy, and that there's a certain point of connectivity, and I don't know what the number is, but basically where the bottom level guy of whatever, and I'm not saying bottom in a negative way, but where at a certain level somebody sees up and interacts with somebody up to a certain point, that top level they interact with is likely the personality that's driving the culture that they see, right? And now that person might be getting culture from above them, and a good leadership organization like that top level trickles down correctly, but that breaks in certain large organizations or whatever. It can break depending on how well you're doing your oversight and whatnot. That's what I see as what you're saying. So that can change over time, but I 100% agree that like our organization is very much run by the way that Brian and I see things. Brian's very much the visionary. He's got a very solid way that he wants to do things, and then he and I do have a slightly different, well, pretty significant different approach, but we work well together. So that gives that, like you said, that nice push and pull that helps develop our organization. But we generally see things in a similar overall. So it's beneficial, but that can be problematic. And then to highlight a problem that you're probably running into, Kelly, is that I assume, based on past conversations, that a lot of your the people you've been working with are more tech related, or even in small businesses, a lot of the leadership, or a lot of the owners, right, who are the de facto leaders, are task oriented, work oriented to begin with, which is probably why it's harder to have leadership conversations and drill into the leadership stuff, because that's not their initial skill set usually. But successful companies, you'll see they're naturally doing it, but they didn't start out learning leadership.
And I agree with Dana. And one question I have for you, Kelly, is, the leadership component, like Dana points out, in a smaller org, regardless of their area of discipline, I think you either have people that have built the organization themselves and have this, like for me, if I build, if I am contemplating this, but if I built an organization from scratch, I have a, kind of like Brian and Dana, I have this conceived idea of what these individuals that have autonomy would do and how they act in an org.
Yeah. No, I'm loving. I've had a few different thoughts and ideas just culminate together in this, especially around what you're saying, Faisal, from the larger organizations, and what you feel isn't. I can rephrase the entire topic in question around a business owner's process as we iterate and grow, my proof of concept to build the organization to smooth scaling. I always say, to go from building the organization to smooth scaling, that's where you absolutely have to have some dedicated leadership at the very top level functions of the organization. For us, it's between delivery, demand, and internal operations. I feel like that framework, now that is more operationally minded, I can now take a leap and say, this is where leadership is going to have to come in. And I love the idea of, providing a growth to that person in and towards autonomy, right? That's the goal. You, as a business owner, don't you want them to function that way? That it comes back to confidence and trust. For me as the top level owner, it's really hard for business owners to release to this idea of autonomy, that I'm going to allow them to run it in their own way. It does require clear requirements and expectations for that business unit, but I'm going to trust them. I
I disagree with that previous comment you made, but please finish.
So I like the idea of how can I coach a small business owner who I'm focusing on operations around the topic of leadership. I can make that connection here, I think, in that context.
And I would say that, and again, merely one data point, Dana, I don't know if you know, I work for a gaming company, a tech company, but really writing code for slot machines. And me coming to that role was a 2+ month, 7-round interview to get the COO position there. And I can tell you that there were no details around the areas of responsibility outside of vague. What the founder and the CEO wanted and the president was to have certain duties removed off their plate. Mm-hmm. They wanted to see certain results, and they had sacred cows that couldn't be touched. And once they laid that out for me, they wanted to make sure I could navigate within those parameters. Mm-hmm. And then before they even considered filling this position, they were in small business round groups like Kelly, like you perform. And it's about mentally preparing to hand over responsibilities, have a measurement that wasn't micromanaging, because most of these organizations have had to micromanage, like Dana was saying, well deep into the organization until they get to a certain scale. And and giving that up is super important for them because they know they can't scale beyond it. But it's a two sides of the same coin. They want to give it up, but they want that clarity. And they struggle with someone new coming in, especially outside the organization. And 90% of the time, they only go outside the organization if they don't have the skill set within their team, because most likely they haven't recruited or retained people with higher skill sets because they normally leave an organization that's smaller. So in this case, when you are with, most companies will promote from within, and what you get there is you get this cadence or this acceptance of the framework of what has existed to date, and you normally don't get that ability to dynamically grow. So, you know, so as a group grows, you'll have the same people hold, and it gets to a tipping point where the leadership team will go, I will bring someone new in, and that causes some of the people that have existed to kind of scale out of the organization when it comes to responsibilities, because they've kind of just grown within this very protected environment to get there. So.
You brought up a thought that I have, again, bringing it back into the small business world of the business owner in trying to evolve the organization and build a more requisite. So we've talked about organizational structure in the past around, do you have, you know, a owner, visionary CEO person, and then a number two, whatever you want to call it, head of operations, COO, integrator, general manager, who's, you know, then what's below them, you know, or, you know, kind of who's reporting to them in either a director level or a management level. When we talk about leadership, is it more the CEO visionary's role to develop that next layer of leadership, or would it be that second in command, do you think?
Dana, you want to weigh in first?
Not positive. I'm thinking, well, I mean, I don't think that,
or both.
Depends on what you mean by develop it. Like, I think of it as like, you know, the visionary is the person that sets the culture and should be setting the culture, and, you know, whoever is working with them at the next level or whatever, I think the two are required to be developing the leadership, but it's really starts from that vision, that like all of that stuff should be what's helping develop it, if that makes sense. Like, you should be building to that type of thing. So I don't really know that it's that, well, individual's responsibility to build the leadership. I think that, you know, I guess I'm traditional, right? So you kind of bounce down the chain, and everybody participates in developing the people below them. I don't see that as just, like I wouldn't say, hey, Brian, you're the only one that's developing leadership here. You know what I mean?
So right now in our org structure, we have a function called develop leadership in Trellis tools. I don't know where to put that. Do I put that in the visionary department or the head of operations? Where do I put that function?
You
Who's
don't, because
responsible?
I wouldn't.
Dana's point is true. I think there's two. I break down that area into two big groups. Everything Dana says is true. It's a holistic approach to developing leadership, expertise, areas of responsibility that goes up and down the chain, if you want to think of it,
Right.
based on a great organization. The ability to foresee and acquire leadership talent, that's a combination between the visionary, and in your case, Kelly, 99% of those responsibilities stay there, and maybe 1% stays with the ops side. And the reason why the ops side is
One more time on that. You said it's broken out into. I'm sorry, I missed that.
into two groups.
Yep.
It's everything Dana said on the development of the existing team. The ability to forecast and predict or project when new leadership needs to be established is always going to be within the visionary founder, because that's how small businesses work. Again, just in my opinion, the 1% that comes from operations is going to continually give feedback about constraints, and that's where the visionary has to take it and has to figure out what the next stage gate is to get the organization into the next level of performance. And that's why the visionary, who's, because everything is based on finances, and since the visionary holds the finances so tight, it's normally only going to be them that will start that process.
Yeah, I would even go, so I look at it as, it's not just, I wouldn't do develop leadership as like a primary task. It's more of a understanding.
It is a responsibility of someone in the organization, though, correct, to develop leaders.
Not necessarily just that. So in my opinion, it's understanding, it's everybody that's got people below them has a certain level of responsibility for developing people to fulfill the roles that they need to fill. Leadership is necessary in certain roles and should therefore be developed for those roles as a piece of that role. So like I look at it as a manager is developing people below him to be hopefully taking their spot someday as they promote, right? Like that's kind of, everybody wants to just promote through the chain and whatnot. That's and or providing a path for those people and understanding the people below you and helping them promote where they want to go. It's not just developing leadership. Like it's developing people to be ready for whatever role that you think that they're going towards and to help them do that. And I don't think organizations do a good enough job of planning ahead for people and helping understand. And they think they're trying to just fill a role to fill a role, but they don't. And that's where we talk about like, they want to hire from within, but and that's where you get that trust factor, right? You trust somebody from within because they've proven technical capability. And what small businesses tend to not do correctly is they don't understand that proving technical prowess does not mean managerial or leadership or whatever prowess. And so while you trust them to get things done, you're placing trust to do one thing based on something else that's not necessarily accurate. But I look at it as it's a piece of understanding what the roles below you need to have for development, and understanding your role so that you're training your replacement to fill you as you move up the ranks, right? So each level has a responsibility.
Yeah, and I agree with Dana. I mean, I don't know how you're compartmentalizing leadership into this kind of role and responsibility. But Dana, the only constraint I think in small organizations is your last point, is that oftentimes people are not going to be at the liberty to train and get someone to replace them because there is no upward path in most smaller orgs. You kind of plateau out. So what you end up doing is you either have to embrace the concept that your organization is going to do the best of training and cross-training individuals and know that at some point they hit a plateau that either they stay within the organization and kind of have a you know a flatter slope of development, or you're okay with them moving on to another organization because it doesn't hurt to have advocates in other parts of your field that have really thought of your organization as well. Even in large organizations like at the Dolan group, I had to face that because at the time, my IT team was being recruited daily, weekly by the market, and I never felt that further training would hurt our retention, even though their skills were higher in demand for both value and opportunities. So, I still had over a 90% retention, closer to 95, 96% retention for the whole team. And I felt good about it.
100%. And I would even go so far as to say, Kelly, you're going to experience this a lot with the people that you're working with, right? Because you're helping them develop, and which means that they're going to hopefully be starting to add organizational elements. But they've likely, if they're ready to be starting to work with you, they've likely got people on staff. This is what happened at Point North, right? Who have advanced to a point that the company is not yet ready for, and that will probably end up moving on may end up moving on because they've advanced to that level and need something more, and aren't ready to do it within the company or weren't developed in that way. And that happened. We had a couple people that left or whatever when we were growing or were changing. And I think that that's a big part of it, is we didn't have their next step ready for them yet. And they had been with the organization so long that they were definitely ready and needed to grow, which worked out well for them and for us, because then we brought in people that had the growth, that potential that meets with the timeline that we were currently at, like that we could actually provide for. So I think you're probably going to run into that a lot. And I agree. This was from previous topics, but I 100% agree. Train your people. Don't worry about whether or not you're training for your competition or something. Like, just train them because, if you have a vision for your people, if you talk to them about what you want, you understand their path, and you're training them the best you can, like you said, you're going to get a 90% retention rate. You're going to have a high retention rate because those people see that and respect that, and they see that you are invested in them. So even sometimes when you don't have a position that's ready for them, if they see the trajectory of your company is growing and they see that you believe in them, then they will likely stay and aim for those positions you're talking to them about. And if not, and they go somewhere else, like you said, that's where a good leader understands, like, my success is in my people, and sometimes that success isn't with me. And if they're massively successful somewhere else, that's probably going to lead, selfishly, even that'll probably lead to some sort of business opportunity in the future. But non-selfishly, like, awesome for them, right? And if I don't have a spot for them, then okay, then go grow somewhere else, and we can bring somebody else in that has that growth opportunity that might hit it at the right timeline. So I'm always for train. Don't worry if about it. I know it's a cost thing and stuff, but man, it's always worth investing in your people, in my mind.
Yeah, I agree with Dana, and I think the other element, Dana, I don't know if you and Brian have ever discussed this. We did this in an org. Is you would take, like, say someone is you're mentoring someone for your role, and you were saying, like, again, I'm sorry if it's not Matthew. In my mind, you had mentioned Matthew, but like, if that person does not want leadership responsibilities, but you need to give them another element, and this is where that relationship with you and Brian are so important. Is what you do then is you take a fifth of your responsibility, an area that both complements where they want to go and complements the need you have. You give that to this new person, Matthew. They run with it and you mentor them. Then you have, technically a sector you can take over from Brian. So what you end up doing is you end up freeing up Brian's time to do more of his passion areas or his element areas, and you now have new areas of responsibility. And Matthew, you can justify additional compensation for Matthew because he's taken a sliver of responsibility and running with it. And for me, that has been a big plus of retention. The downside is usually in the leadership group, and it comes back to your point, Dana, about kind of being a servant leader, is that, like, for me, my compensation plateaued for 4 years, which was, I was still making good money for myself, but all of my increases in compensation went to my team, and I was completely fine with it. So I'd had a COLA increase for the 4 years, but that was about it.
Yep.
So I was completely fine with it because at the end of the day, I was being challenged by some new elements, and I was trying to pace down my work schedule so that, that was fine for me and for all involved.
Right. Well, it actually ended up probably your compensation per work changed a bit because other people were getting some of that responsibility and stuff too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it's actually an indirect increase at that point. Yeah. So coming back to leadership stuff though, Kelly, I want to just touch it. Are we answering still on the right questions that you're thinking, or?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts that I'm developing around my I want to commoditize leadership. I want to be able to create a function that I can plug into any organization that brings people in and spits out leadership people on the other side of it. So I'm trying to dissect down what does that mean, and is there a way for an organization to implement practices and policies that, here's an example. We talk about a small business or mid-sized business and say, wow, they have great leaders. What does that look like? And how does an organization that is labeled as they have great leaders, what is that? How would that look? What would that look like in process? And that's where I go back to. I know it's shared responsibility from the top, and leadership, I do agree, cascades. It has to, but I think there maybe a better way to put it is there a leadership philosophy and methodology that can be implemented into a business as it's trying to grow and take that next step and provide that autonomy. For me, at those top 3 levels is where you would start. So that's, my mind is filtering all of what you're saying around me creating this component. It's messy, I think, in that it does cascade through, but my feeling is I see it as the second in command's responsibility to take the visionary or CEO's culture mindset and bring it down into the rest of the organization. Of course, the visionary needs to have an impact of leadership to the entire organization. They need to be seen at the front line. That's them playing that role in cascading. But I think it's still that second in command here's what I'm trying to do: tie tactical to leadership development. What are the steps that we would take with someone we've identified, as Faisal said? Can you find it? Can you see it? Identify those people who have a leadership mentality, and then what do we do with them then?
So to kind of get to that again, this is where I go to it's a flow, right? Is that you give, and this gets to the autonomy, and this gets to the trust that we were talking about, and all those aspects. Really, it comes down to, like, the way that I tend to develop it is, like, take Ben, for instance, new young guy growing and whatnot, definitely not ready for leadership yet, right? He's not there. He shouldn't be, he's young. But I've given him, I gave him N Central as his task. Our RMM is like, hey, I want you to learn this. I want you to be the guy for this. And I've been slowly but surely getting him to be more and more tactically confident with that program, to the point now where when people come to me, I can answer those questions. And there are things that I can do that I choose not to do. And this is very hard. And I think this is a piece that people need to do. I don't do them. I send people to him first. And then I work with him to show him how to do that. And so that's helping him develop the ability to show other people, to work with other people and to do those things. It's making sure not to be doing the things that you shouldn't be doing so your people have a chance to learn them is really, really key. And I have a person I know that talks about this, and we all kind of fail at this to a certain degree. It's difficult, but like, if I can't just disappear from my job and it keeps functioning and the people below me can manage it, and then I'm not doing my job right as a leader. I'm not training my people right if I can't step away at any point, right? Then I haven't been training people to be leading in the ways that they need to be leading. I'm leery of trying to just develop leaders. Leaders are important, but I think we put a little too much emphasis on it too. We need to just develop for the positions that we want. And if you're trying to develop leadership qualities, you have to, it's just encouraging people to do those things. And like, for instance, like for my senior techs, they need to have a certain amount of leadership. I, try to push mentorship as much as possible. And when people come to me with questions I can answer, a lot of times I won't. It's faster and I can just get it done. And this is the problem a lot of small business owners run into. I can do it. I can get that done, and I'll get it done in 5 minutes. Congratulations. But every time you do that, you take away the ability for your team to do it. Is it necessary sometimes? Yes. We're a small business. You got to move. But when it's not necessary, don't selfishly take that opportunity away from the people below you. That's how I always look at it when I'm doing that stuff. And it took me a long time to learn because, as you grow in organizations, and this is a big thing in the Navy too, right? Like you are a performer. You get promoted for being a performer. And it's very hard then, and you feel guilty, like I could do that. Like, and you feel kind of guilty not doing work that you could do. But a lot of times you got to get around to that mentality of, but this is a good learning thing for that person. So I need to give them that opportunity to succeed, to fail too. You also got to give people the opportunity to fail. And that's the trust piece, is if you don't give it to somebody and give them your expectations and then let them do it their way, you're not going to develop good leaders. You've got to do that. And sometimes it's going to backfire and you're going to have a problem and you're going to have a corrective action and whatnot, but that's growth. So that's my
I so agree with that, and I do just want to add the failure piece is also such an important factor, Kelly, and that is, like if it's a small org, it's this true evaluation that occurs not just within the org, but a trusted third party to come in and be a sounding board about the evaluation elements, of the current team, and kind of what we did with Mankato. It's just this interesting discussion all the way through. But I think the failure element is a degree of failure. I think when people say, "Holy shit, I was not expecting these responsibilities. I realize I don't like it," it's actually a really good thing. And then you can understand where your gaps in your organization are. And everything else that Dana said is 100% true, that coaching them, that laying it out. I look at it as, Dana, have you heard about the active leadership model? There's 3 stages. The first stage is you come in, you show the person exactly how it's being done currently and how you want it done. The second piece is the person does it, and then they make sure they get your approval prior to the completion. And the third piece is that they do it without any prompting from you, and you look at the results. So for me, that's kind of a degreed step of transitioning of responsibilities and autonomy. And I find that very, very good,
I hadn't heard it that way before, but I agree. And that kind of fits to Kelly with what you're looking for, trying to commoditize this aspect is you show people what to do, like that whole active leadership model of you know, that's kind of the way that I operate. I just never had a name for it. And so it's more ambiguous, but that lays out the framework of how to train people to do it, you know, exactly the right way. And then, you know, again, in a small organization, giving people control over something is a great way to start to see where their leadership level is. So you show them, like, that's exactly what I did with Ben, I guess, if you look at it that way, is I showed him how to do N-central. Now he does things and comes to me for approval. And in some aspects of it, he just does things now, and doesn't even have to ask me because he knows how to do it and he's doing it well. And, you know, I've even pushed back on him sometimes because he's young. And this is something you'll do when you're developing people, is they'll keep seeking approval and you have to push back and say, how would you do it? You know, make them make the decision. And actually, back when I was at Cardinal Blast, this isn't developing leader, it's a general training thing, but it fits with this, is I was training people how to do the job, and they would just keep looking at me and like, what do I do next? What do I do next? What do I do next? After I had gone through enough of the training. And I frequently would, this happened pretty regularly, where I would get to the point where I would have my manager call me. So I had to leave, and I'd say, hey, I've got to leave, keep going as far as you can go, and I'll catch up with you. But, you know, the supervisor's calling me, and I would leave them, and then I would come back, and I would kind of see, I would go talk to them, and then I would watch them through the aisles to make sure it looked like they were doing fine without them seeing me. And then I would show up, you know, an hour or two later and be like, looks like you got it, you know. But I had to give them the chance to do it without seeking approval, and that's a growth step too. So anyway, I agree with what you're saying is kind of the point there.
So I have, before we got on our call today, I went through and looked at all of my PowerPoints, and, you know, I have thousands, right? And the training materials that I've put together and also in my sales conversations, I have one slide that talks about leadership in all of it. And basically all I have it as trying to look at leadership from an operation standpoint. I was titling it the nuts and bolts of leadership, you know. And to me, this was back in the day, and I think it's still somewhat related. There are three parts to that. One, a clearly communicated purpose and vision. Number two, a strategically aligned work to the vision. And then the third component to leadership is supporting the people who execute the work. So some of that we did touch on a little bit. I think good leadership provides context of purpose in why the front line is doing their work. And I think that's part of that cascading through the hierarchy, that the frontline managers are not just giving assignments to give assignments, that they're actually providing a context of the value and the purpose of the work being done as it relates to the entire purpose and vision of the organization for that. And then to provide what I think that leadership model that Faisal just said, now mentoring them through. I did just pull up an article that I got from Tom Foster about the 4 different components of soft skills. And I think soft skills has kind of become a dirty word now. But he talked about the 4 soft skills: coaching, and they're different. Coaching versus mentoring versus training versus counseling. And I think that's a bit of a difference between a manager and a leader. Managers train, they might coach a little bit, but they typically don't mentor or counsel. I think those 2 aspects are more leadership activities, or you know, that you would see in somebody who you would identify as a leader versus a manager. In the hierarchy, I look at the director level people as absolutely being leaders and having leadership traits and practicing leadership around more of that mentoring and counseling. And then as you're down to the manager role, it's more tactical. They're providing oversight, You want to have some leadership in that, but their focus more is in coordinating and working with people in execution. So that's just my thoughts and kind of wrapping some of that up with what my current perspective is on, I look at this as if I were to add a course for our clients beyond just our implementation of structured operations called leadership development. We're going to provide a 4-week course on leadership development. What would that look like? How and specifically focused on a small business owner or a second command to give them the tools to bring leadership into the organization and develop it. And because I don't think it's done. You don't just like someone goes through some training and you're a leader and you're done. I think that philosophy and that culture has to continually be fostered from the top down around those leadership skills, mentoring them in. And I think that should be part of one-on-ones and performance evaluations, I guess, at the manager and director level roles of, are you a good leader? Are you executing on coaching and counseling? And so that's where I'm going to try to take this information and try to move it towards something like that. So yeah, that's where my thoughts are.
One small comment on that is that, that's a part of the traction thing too, right? Like it's in 90 when I do it, is when I review my people, they review me too.
Yeah.
They review my communication, they review, how they feel about the tasks they're given. They review my leadership of them too. And that's that last piece you mentioned. I just wanted to mention that briefly. This is really important, is having people do that and assess your leadership too, which helps you grow. And it also helps, most of the time, it has put into context what I'm telling them as well. It helps the team recognize, because people pause and think about it then, which I like, because there's definitely times where people get annoyed with their leadership or their management and they're not really considering what they're going through too. And so having them do that assessment back is actually, it helps keep that connection where they go, oh yeah, they are doing things for me if you're doing it right, or you find out you're not. One way or the other.
And there should be that, back to that culture of trust, that they should be comfortable and open to say potentially negative things about their manager or the leadership in general, the organization. And I think that's an important culture point. One thing that, as far as the context and having the visionary connecting to the front line, Atomic Data used to do a great, was it quarterly, Faisal, that they did where Jim presented to the whole company about initiatives and where the company's going?
6 months.
It's stuff like that I think is a good leadership practice to do. I guess that's another way to put it. What are the practices of leadership in an organization? But it goes back to purpose and context, that my work mattered.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to say this, but I feel more confused now than later, because what I'm confused about is kind of leadership is such a vague comment, and like what Jim did is not an element of what I would consider leadership. I think that there is, when you're talking to an organization about their ability to grow, I go back, Dana, to your point. I think you're focusing too much on leadership. I think what you need to figure out is how can you scale operations with a control and command structure, and then from that you have to think about what autonomy in each person is different. Can the leader tolerate, and what is their requirement to do so? And I only bring this up, Kelly, because everything we've discussed, and Dana, I'm sorry to reference a person you don't know, is Tammy. Tammy's a completely different model. In fact, if you walked in and said, hey, I'll take this over, she's probably going to go, yeah, go do it. And that leadership is kind of ambiguous when it comes to running and telling things to do. You know, so versus Jim, which is a strong command and control. I mean, to this day, he probably doesn't have the autonomy given to Larry and some of his other right hand people that he normally does because there's an ego with Jim that
Yeah.
only he the best. So yeah, that element of speaking to the whole team is great, but that strokes the ego.
Yeah.
But it's
There was.
not, it's not a. I don't consider that an element of leadership.
So I agree with you 100%, Faisal, and that's probably why I've shied away from the topic when I try to promote our services or promote good operations in general. My feeling is if you have great operations, you don't need that much leadership. It just kind of takes care of itself. Um, in a way, if there's a balance, to me, you can have strong leadership and weak operations. Oh, I'm going to slide that scale over to strong operations. And then I think maybe that's a good sign of leadership, is that I just focus on good operations. Maybe that's the way I could define it, of just give people clarity about why they're there. And it goes back to my simple three things. Give them clear purpose. Do their beliefs align with yours as an organization? Do they want to fight for what this thing is all about, and be clear about what their requirements are in that? Give them clear instruction, and then support the shit out of them when they're troubled and they're struggling and tired, or be mindful of those things. I think that's how I've been approaching it. What I haven't, and I'm trying to engage these leadership coaches and experts in leadership. And I just, the conversation of operations never comes up with them. And I'm just like, what am I missing here?
Well, yeah, it's task oriented versus people oriented. They are different things. I kind of, so one thought on that makes me, sometimes we get like being a leader confused with leadership positions. Leadership positions require leadership, but there is a split. But what you're talking about makes me a little nervous going too far one way too. So if you look at, I'm going to just use military example, and I'm sorry if I'm talking, but the Russians, right, typically throughout history have been known for being very regimented in the way that they conduct military operations, right? They're going to do things this way, and this is what they're going to do, and it's going to be very structurally process driven. Whereas it's been commented, I don't remember who made the comment, but that Americans, right, our style is, we do have that process, people have it, but we also give the autonomy of leadership so that we have a much more flexible style when we're engaged in operations. We go more off of rules of engagement over straight up process. So when you say like just process, you don't need it. You do, because the problem with just process and not developing leadership is that when there's a problem, they cannot deal with it. Straight up process, when something works outside of the process and you haven't been developing leadership skills at all levels, and see, that's the thing, is I think certain levels of leadership need to be trained at all levels, depending on what your position is. But if you can't make any autonomous decision on your own outside of your process, then it's broken. So there's a balance there. I'm not saying go away from process. I love process. That's how you scale. But giving your people the ability to make the decisions when they need to make them is massively important, or you're not going to make it.
And I agree, Dana. And I'm using another military example. I think it's the fractured of a team in the field. I think it came out of the Marines, and it's that group of three. So it's the ability for teams that are isolated from HQ to make decisions in the field in alignment with the goals. And what they have is they have this sense of autonomy and support. They have this guiding principles they work towards, and they have a clear understanding of what the overall objectives are. So if you break away from HQ and you don't have this ability to communicate, there is still this understanding of the overall goal that these individual teams, now fragmented teams, will work towards to get there. It's kind of like
what were those three
mentality.
things one more time, Faisal? What were the three? Understanding the goal?
understanding the overall goal, the support and autonomy to make decisions in the field along those, and the general guiding principles of how to operate. So that's where you don't shoot civilians, you don't, there's certain lines you don't cross as a team. So they all have those components, and they then can work in the field autonomously without direct orders from HQ. And Dana, your example of the Russians is great, because I think that's what you see with the command and control structure, where it's so regimented, there is no flexibility to field decisions. And when it breaks down, you can see the field decisions being not followed by the general principles, perhaps, of the organization. And you see that like in sales, or you see that in a lot of areas where the principles of the organization are curtailed by individual greed or demand or whatever you want to say.
I think that does lend back to a business structure too, that I think the idea of, I use the term freedom within a framework might apply here. And I think if you at the top give good requirements and let them then be free to determine and have that autonomy about how it gets done, but it has to be towards an aggregate to the top somehow, in that there needs, it can't just be willy-nilly in that autonomy. And I think that's what you're talking about, understanding the goal was good.
Yeah. And to just highlight, to be devil's advocate, and something that I've noticed too, is that, because I like this style, is that we do have a tendency, especially in today's age for whatever reason, to give people too much autonomy at the wrong level too. So you got to be careful with that. People do crave structure, and like a lot of times you're like, well, people want to have buy-in, and I want to get more from them. But what ends up happening is, if they aren't at the right level for what you're asking, is you get a lockup, because they haven't been trained. They don't necessarily, depending on where you're at and what training you've done, they may not understand fully where they fit in the scheme of things. They may not understand your rules of engagement, your guiding principles, or whatever. And and if you're asking too much of somebody for a decision, then they're just going to lock up and not want to do it too. So you got to be careful about that. I agree 100% with what we're saying. Just that's the cliff to watch out for, is when you get to that point where you're like, hey, like if I were to ask Ben to just make some larger decision, be like, oh, just figure it out, and he's not ready for it, I'm just setting him up for failure, and that's not fair either. And I need to understand that just because we like to feel like we're giving people freedom doesn't mean that it's always that way. I worked with a guy who used to say, like, people say they want a lot of freedom, but they really crave structure, is what he always said. So he went too far with it. There's a balance.
So we do need to wrap up here. I have a couple of course I have this recorded. I will get the link posted out for that. A couple housekeeping items. I've gone back and forth, as I normally do in any sort of decision, about the name of this group. So we were Ops Masters, and then I played around with this, focusing on managers and trying to be more specialized with the Mighty Managers. I didn't like that. So now I've been back to Ops Masters, or open for discussion. I don't know.
Dana and I were talking offline. Will there be t-shirts provided for all the different names, so we can have just an array of
For sure.
Dana, because then you and I change mid-meeting and be like, oh, hold on.
So there could be a separate group, actually, at the end of the day, one that does focus on managers. That's not a bad idea. But for now, we're back to Ops Masters unless we come up with anything else. I haven't been promoting other than the core group between you two, and I'm including Wes and trying to get him and his ops guy, Brian, to participate. But I'm trying to just get that feeling of what's the right time to turn it up and try to promote and elevate. I've enjoyed it when it's just Dana. I've enjoyed today with Faisal included. So I feel like I'm going to let it kind of evolve on its own. But maybe in the next month or two, try to promote. And what that looks like, go ahead.
Nope, I was going to make a smart ass comment that there should be wings and beer involved, but I'm just going to
Well, and
reserve that comment.
that's something I did talk about, or I did want to bring up too. Getting back to in person, and my original intention with this group was for it to be a get together in person to kind of re-engage people. So I'd like to do that. I've been doing it more out of convenience for me, probably in the last couple of months, but my schedule is opening up a little bit here, so I'd like to get back to the Wellworth. It's a reasonably inexpensive venue for us to do that. And it helps to promote the group within their that context of the Wellworth as well.
I would be careful with that. I would argue that like it may curtail some involvement. You may get better involvement by starting out being virtual and then moving when you get more people, because people a physical need to be there ends up, and I know you can join via video, but it causes people feel weird, I think, joining by video when everybody else is like that, you get that like the potential like, oh, I'm the guy who's not joining. I don't know. It's just something I'm considering.
I was going to offer both, and I think there might be shortcomings to the both, but I think at the end of the day, that's probably going to be the best. I think if I did one or the, I don't know. How about between the two of you? What would you have a preference?
I'm with you. I think remote's always going to work for me. I was really joking about beer and wings. The beer and wings need this dynamic discussion where there are maybe table topics on a whiteboard, and then we just randomly talk through it, and that's where you start evolving to kind of this groundswell of components of all the discussions. But I think discussions like this is best over video. I mean, this is the first time I made it in months.
Yeah.
And it was just a tiny moment, and I'm in the office, so it's, it works for me. I agree with Dana. I think there is maybe once every quarter or once every or
Right.
one or half a year, every 6 months, you have a grouping that's more social, and you have these topics where people could prioritize, like this is the next component, or you would say these are my hotspot topics, in an area, and as the groups come in and we mingle and talk. Once you're in a relaxed setting, not like in the office, there's your brain changes, and it gives you a more dynamic thinking process, and I think this is proven psychologically. So it's, like for me, when I'm in a work setting or my office, there's a regiment that comes with just how I think. But if you're, one beer, in a social setting, you can start looking and having a safer environment where you can have these discussions.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, at least especially as a next step. That we can continue on with this. It does make engagement easier. And then as far as the connecting in person social aspect of it, I do like that idea. Just make it something else. And then people can volunteer if they want to get to know you better and wanted to do that.
And with a small group, you don't have to do it at the place. I think like just finding a place that's central and has kind of a table or even a room kind of separate.
Yeah,
you can just have that discussion in a really informal way and not cost, it's cost it won't cost much, and it's just great. But I think the laid back discussions, when I've had my offsites, the laid back discussions have brought things to the forefront that was missed in every other formal. And I cherish that. Every work I try to do that. I'm trying to do that this Thursday, and it's different. And one of the aspects, Dana, I'm just going to plant the seed with you and Kelly, is we need to talk about the changing demographics of the work group, because you were talking leadership and everything, and that's within protocols of different generations. But I can tell you, in my current role, there's the type of people that come into my field now, or the field I'm in, and the generational change challenges are really interesting. I'm not at liberty to go into them, but that would be a great topic to do, at an offsite beer thing.
awesome.
Dana, I'm in a nonprofit music setting.
Oh, okay.
So I'll noodle that around. I think I'm now leaning more towards we just continue this as a virtual. It's great for getting feedback recorded versus in person. that tends to be more of a struggle. The technology is more challenging when it's hybrid, when it's both there and separate for that as well. I did send out an email last as far as more of aligned operations, my selfish needs. You guys both weighed in on our change of strategic planning to something else, that term strategic planning. I did send an email out. I'm currently sitting on the term continuous improvement. So it's interesting. I surveyed business owners and non-operations people, and I was correct in they don't like strategic planning. They don't like that term. They don't, and I found it interesting. Wes and Dana and you, Faisal, you're all hardcore operations people. You love strategic planning, the ideas of it. I think most business owners don't.
I wasn't arguing that they love the idea of strategic planning. I was arguing that that's not the problem. The name isn't the problem. The topic is the problem. I don't think that business owners like strategic planning in general. I don't think that they necessarily, and I could be wrong, I haven't read your email, that they have a problem.
Say don't like. I'm trying to provide a more inviting conversation about the ideas of what strategic planning is. And I think that continuous improvement feels to a business owner more inviting. I think they relate to it a little bit better. That's where I'm at right now. I'm going to write up kind of more of a better explanation about moving forward, especially if I term it, we have 6 practices of structured operations. The practice of continuous improvement feels better to me than the practice of strategic planning. I think strategic planning is part of continuous improvement. So anyway.
Can we start a website that would be a dictionary of Kelly's business terms, also with a subtitle of like an ever evolving document?
Words matter.
Idea, Dana, but maybe we can have the back of our t-shirts have those terms.
Hey, words matter, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think I'm just going to weigh in here, Kelly, and I think I've shared this with you over drinks and in person for years. Is that I think you're rearranging the deck chairs on a ship and not getting the ship on the right direction. So I mean, and what I mean by that is that I think that the aspect of consulting is such a dynamic engagement because the players involved are so different. So Dana, you and Brian are completely different than Wes and Brian, and the old Brian, and and just an element. But I think it comes down to this fundamental belief: there is a skill set that the organization like you, Kelly, would bring in, and it's this high degree of trust between the two parties, period. And then you can augment the vocabulary, you can augment the terms, you can augment the rollout. And this is where you and I, Kelly, have changed and Dana, and with the short time we kind of just met and worked together, is the dynamic of the framework is there. The color of the framework, the terms used to describe it and everything are loosely defined. As long as there's a general approach of how to move an organization forward. And Dana and I agree with you, are both more ops based, but I've had a lot of visionary responsibilities in different levels. And I can tell you right now that for me personally, the strategic planning is a vital area of thought for me, and I can't shake it. So it seems foreign for me for any of the other terms.
Yeah. So I listened to
Sorry, guys, I'm waiting for another Zoom meeting, so I have to jump.
Yeah.
Hear you too.
Have a good one.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
My piece on that a little bit, Kelly, is like I listened to a guy a long time ago, an audiobook that talked about like the same but different, right? Like how and the success of hits, I think it was, and how people have a certain level of tolerance, or maybe it was a sales book, I don't remember, but they have a certain level of tolerance for the different. And in order to do well, actually having a certain amount of different is good, but only up to a certain amount. right? And so that's where I see the terminology changing. And if I use traction as an example, rocks, right? That's an absurd term for a goal or whatever, basically. Like it's a rock. But they made that term and then they stuck with it and they kind of made it a vocabulary word within their whole environment and then stuck to it. And now people are trained to use that. This actually goes back to when I recommended that someday what you need, what I would recommend is if you do make these changes is to figure out what your vocabulary is and then stick with it. And then it's really the intent behind the vocabulary that matters. But
Yeah.
you don't want to change all of the vocabulary. You want to be strategic with it. You're making yourself different. And then, and that goes into if you ever make an ebook or something, right? So that people have rules of the road. One problem if you keep changing the terminology is that you're training people on the terminology. And the more different you are from the norm of business, the more explaining you have to do, which is fine. But if you have too much, then that becomes off-putting. So
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to it as a thing. I'm just saying like, that's my take on the naming of things and the words. Words are very important. And that's actually why I think it's important to keep it, why I like strategic planning as a concept, because it's well rooted. I do understand the need to maybe change aspects of it, like you're saying, the wording, if people aren't willing to have the conversation solely because of the phrase, because it's off-putting. I have the feeling that if you even changing the phrase, if you're still talking about strategic planning, the act of it with different words, people will be open to listening to it and then be averse to it once they figure out it's strategic planning you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's the strategic planning they don't like, not the phrase.
So
But-
it's well, I think I'm in my mind satisfying a couple of your points and why we're doing this. One, I'll also say I feel we're early enough in our evolution of our company to where our audience is very small. So
Right.
I'm not changing it and it's drastically affecting a lot of people.
Yep.
And so but I'm feeling like there's a need for me to change the methodology around the goal of what strategic planning represents. And I think there is a buzz in the industry. I've been reading a lot about development of software applications is influencing me a lot right now.
Okay.
And their philosophy right now is you can no longer, because we used to actually call it specifically creating an annual strategic plan. Strategic planning was something you did on an annual basis. You evaluated the organization at the end of the year and you created a plan for the next 12 months. Well, that sort of approach they're saying nowadays that's old school. That just doesn't work anymore. You have to reevaluate and you have to do a strategic plan every quarter. You have to be more nimble in being able to tack more quickly than on a 12-month plan is just, it's a waste of time, is what a lot of the up and coming innovative companies are saying. That you have to look at things more continuously on a quarter by quarter basis. I still agree an annual strategic plan is relevant and valid. But I think at the end of the day, business owners, who is my primary audience, some second in commands, but mostly I'm speaking to business owners who are acting as operations. They have this mentality of, I get that they all want to grow for sure. And they also understand and accept that you got to improve to grow. So that was kind of the basis around the idea of the continuous improvement versus strategic planning. I'm not set on it. That's just kind of where I've landed right now. One thing I've been better about in my maturing is not to knee jerk. I'm not going to go ahead and change it on all of our slides and
Right.
I'm playing around with it. I'm looking at on a slide. I'm actually doing a recording of me presenting that slide to just see what that feels like. Maybe I'll do a test group of business owners and operations around that terminology and see what they say. before it's formally accepted and adopted. So I'm trying to be more strategic about these changes and not just be knee jerk on them.
Right.
So remember our aggregate output discussion, you know, that whole, that I basically landed on just, it's called the organizational structure. That's it. I kept to, you know, a common term on that. I think people are comfortable and are familiar with the idea of an organizational structure. I am calling that versus an org chart. So there's some aspects of me and trying to best describe that structure and the design of it as it relates to an org chart or the Traction's accountability chart, which I don't agree with at all. I think that's a mistake to call it an accountability chart because there's too much more to it. Accountability is just one of 5 aspects of your structure that need to be considered in it. But it worked for them, clearly, a lot of that stuff. But anyway, long story short, I am trying to be more strategic about it and thinking that through based on some of, you know, your guys' feedback. And it is interesting, a business owner's perspective versus somebody who's, or I should say better, a visionary's perspective on it versus somebody who's more operational.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like, and then I got to get off here, but I do like that the discussion is going. And I think that type of discussion via email might start to get more people to come to this meeting too. I think that might have, you know, that kind of triggers people to be like, oh, maybe this is a group of people that I do want to talk to, you know what I mean? So I like that you got that going. It's a good
I do want to do that as I'm trying to look at some sort of more discussion group online versus flooding people's inbox. So I would send out an email with here's a topic and here's the link to it.
Right.
There is a blogging feature on my hosting for my website. I have a blog and there's a space there for comments. So I might look at that because I think I'm wondering if it might be of value to have that discussion public and let people see the kind of conversations we're having around operations. So, because really the term strategic planning to me is a cool discussion, not just for me adopting something for my service, but also just in general. What do people think about that versus something like change management? That was the other one I had, or strategic change.
Right.
But continuous improvement is getting to be a buzzword. It's getting some traction out there as far as people identifying with that.
All right.
Anyway, all right, I'll let you go. Thanks for your time. I'll post a link to the video and start planning for next month's.
Rock on.
All right, take it easy.
All right, have a good one.
You too.
Bye.